何もせずに帰る。
そうだ。何もせずに帰ろう。
誰がお前を何もせず行かせると。그러면 하나만 묻자.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is the fear of God. Hello and welcome to not just another episode, not just another anniversary year, but a whole new series starting right now on the Fear of God podcast. Speaking to you right now is maybe your favorite host, Nathan Rouse. Typically with me is my favorite host, Reed Lackey, but he was going to be here, but he insisted on eating breakfast before he joined, which is a little weird because we typically record at about, right now it's 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But hey, I love breakfast and could eat it around the clock. So I'm not gonna diss a guy for wanting some breakfast before he joins the program. So while we wait for him to finish that off, yes, you are listening to The Fear of God. Here at The Fear of God, we explore the holy and the horrific at the intersection of faith and fear, exploring what scares us in order to find out what saves us. If you are new to the show, welcome. If you have been here these 3 years, welcome back. We would love it if you have not. If you would be willing to go to iTunes, leave us a rating, leave us a review, subscribe. More than that, honestly, those are awesome. They really are. They're fun. We enjoy receiving and reading those. But if you'd be open to sharing what we're doing here in some format or fashion on your various social media platforms, that would be amazing as well. I'm really excited about what we got. Hey, Reed, you're back, buddy. You're back. You got a little. You good? You full?
Yes.
Yeah. You okay?
I don't know.
That was a heavy sigh.
Been feeling a little weird, man. I don't know why you ask so many questions. I just, why you gotta interrogate me so much? Why you gotta constantly, you jerk.
Third anniversary, off with a bang.
I'm not feeling. You know what's funny is so in the moment,
What?
real time, in the moment,
Yeah.
I was thinking, I could commit to being like, the Hyojin sort of possessed thing, and I was like, I ain't going to where some of her language goes. I ain't doing that. It's like I can't do that. So it's like I lost commitment on the bit. It's like
That's okay. That's okay.
I started to do
Well,
it.
it's funny because I knew
Reed fashion. I just pulled back from it. Like I can't do that. I can't do that.
You gotta push past that, Reed. Push. What is it? Comfort's not worth dying for. Like,
sure. Yes,
you gotta push past, Reed. That was an endless quote.
Yes, it was.
Here we are, dude.
Yes.
It is. We are formally, as you reminded us last week, formally in our 3rd anniversary, which is exciting. We have reached a milestone. I don't know.
I can't believe it. It's so hard to believe that, like, week on week, with just a couple of little exceptions here and there, we have delivered a new episode, a new conversation about films, books, TV series. Like, it's just, man, it's crazy to think that 3 years are in the can, and to think about how many more might be ahead of us. It's just I love it. I love it.
I do too, brother. Yeah, and I don't know that I even called this out last week when we referenced these anniversaries, but I think I speak for you as well, and feel free to jump in. Like, I couldn't be more grateful for the fun but thoughtful community that's kind of risen up around the show. It's just
absolutely.
really great to see. Even I don't even feel like I'm as active as I want to be, but seeing folks engaging with each other who, of course, outside the Fear of God would not have known each other, and us, posting trailers and sort of Whatcha for each other of readings and whatnot. It's just a really, really fun sort of experience and community that we get to engage in, and that we may be holding the microphones, but we take as much pleasure from engaging with you guys as hopefully y'all do from listening to the show. So very grateful for all of that.
Agreed.
We got a lot to get to, Riri. This is a big episode.
It's pretty daunting.
It is. You were feeling a little under the weather there. I thought about asking you then, but I'll instead be like, "What you watching? What you reading? What are you listening to?"
Ooh. Whoa! It didn't stop, and all of a sudden there were these like haunted mansion gurus like, whoa. I was pulling the caretakers, and they're like, "Oh, my lantern's starting to shake." Okay, so okay, so I know we took a break from it last week, but I can't stop reading.
You can't stop reading.
No,
I'm proud of you.
Okay,
I'm proud.
So,
Did you see continuity expert Steve Beckley's fun little shade he threw at you?
I did. I did. It was kudos to you, Steve.
That was amazing. That was amazing. I thought it was brilliant, Steve. Reed's a tough critic.
It was pretty awesome. It was pretty great. Okay, so yes, I just finished a pretty fun little book, very informative. It kind of reads in many ways like almost like a quasi encyclopedia, just in terms of its formatting and structure. But it's a book called Paperbacks from Hell. It is, yes, it is the subtitled "The Twisted History of the Horror Novels of the 70s and 80s." So this is a book about the trend that happened in the publishing world where really horror novels rarely saw the bestseller list, the major fictional bestseller list. Prior to the 70s, I think the first horror novel that had hit the bestseller list was like one random book from the 50s, and so it was just rarely ever there. But in the 70s, 3 books hit the bestseller list at the same time, not only being a bestseller, but like became a cultural phenomenon. One was a somewhat lesser known book now by Thomas Tryon called The Other. Then there was Ira Levin's Rosemary's Baby, and and then of course a book I love dearly, William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist. Those 3 books hit the bestseller list, and they launched a publishing phenomena where there were a lot of novels that were direct to paperback, and they were pulpy, and they were really sort of direct horror novels with monsters and mutants and mad scientists, and you had government yes, and government conspiracies, and you had opening the gates of hell and all these kind of monsters and weird creatures and everything, and so there was lots and lots of these paperback novels, these paperback pulp novels that made their way to the bestseller list. Well, not necessarily the bestseller list, but they just became a publishing phenomenon. And that lasted through kind of the late 70s and early 80s until a little novel hit the stands called The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. And when that happened, this was so fascinating to me. This is all coming from that book. When that happened, when Silence of the Lambs hit, then horror kind of became out of fashion and got replaced with the word thriller. And there was a large boom of like serial killer storylines, and it gave way, its sort of procedural tone gave way to sort of what we see manifested now in television with like the CSIs and the NCISs and all this other sort of stuff. Like a lot of it can be rooted back to the popularity and success of The Silence of the Lambs, which kind of accidentally killed the mass market pulp horror boom of the 70s and 80s. And this book, Paperbacks from Hell, charts that entire sort of progression and all the different categories of different books. He references somewhere in the neighborhood of like 250 different books that are in different categories. It's a very fun book to kind of browse through. Either you can go through it linearly, or you can take it kind of section by section to the different elements of horror novels from that time period. He's got recommendations, tons of appendices. It's a great book. I really enjoy it. If you're interested in horror fiction, and if you happen to have grown up in the 80s and came across some of those pulp novels in your day, I think you would really, really enjoy this unpacking of that history. Again, it's called Paperbacks from Hell. The author's name is Grady Hendrix. Contribution by Will Erickson. Yes, I highly recommend it. It's a fun book. Might give you some opportunities or some options to go explore further, if you will. So that's what I've been reading.
I dig it. I'm proud of you. Now,
thank you.
You may have said this, but there was a lot you just said. Was this a book that you were tipped off to, or that you just found by browsing?
Found it by browsing, and obviously with a title like that, you get sort of intrigued. And
I feel like you just stumbled on the name of your memoir.
Oh yeah,
found it by browsing.
I used to love the
by
days.
Read Lackey.
Yep, I used to love the days when I could go to the library, and still do it every once in a while, but much more rare these days, where I could just go to the library and browse the new titles and just go home with random things, and it was fun. It was great.
No, I'm serious. It's your memoir. It's about a life lived. I found it by browsing. How did you discover purpose in life? I found it by browsing.
Found it by browsing.
Browsing, and here's the life. Here's the life I got.
Well, I sure didn't get my purpose in life by having it recommended to me. That's for sure. It was like sort of delineating.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
would you be interested in purpose and destiny? Watch it again.
Would you like, bathroom reading, would you like purpose-driven life or found it by browsing? It's like... That's awesome. All right. Okay. Sorry, Rick Warren. So my Whatchas, I've got two little brief ones because I'm going to hold off unpacking one for a few minutes. But the first one is I also finished a book recently too. Look at us read.
I'm amazed. It's stunning.
I can't tell if you're like being a jerk.
I'm not being a jerk.
Like
no,
saying,
I'm like,
look at us reading books.
No, I'm being slightly tongue in cheek, but no, I'm like, we're reading again.
All right. We are. Look at there, reading again. Reading again.
Ain't it good to be reading again?
God. Jeez Louise. All right. So the book I read is by the author Brad Jersak, whom I just referenced 2 weeks ago on Annihilation. Yeah. I've referenced previously multiple times. I read his book, Her Gates Will Never Be Shut. I read his book, A More Christ-Like God. He just released 2 books, one of which I have gotten through. The other one I have not started yet, but I actually did start it, but haven't gotten far. The one I finished is called I-N, with the subtitle Incarnation and Inclusion. And provocative. I will. So it's a shorter book. So I'm not that academic, but
hey, we're reading again. We're reading pamphlets.
Little brochure. Thanks, Brad. You may listen to this at some point, but Brad Jersak is a Canadian. We do love our Canadians at the Fear of God.
We do.
Theologian, pastor, author. I don't know. When I discovered his work, it felt like a breath of fresh air to what had become a staid and sour version of Christianity. And as the title of this book suggests, it does hit on some things that I'm interested in. And I'll save the unpacking for a moment. So I read that book, and then the listening to, also relatively brief. I referenced multiple times the Why Is This Happening podcast with Chris Hayes. Yeah. I recommended this to you a couple weeks ago, Reed, but I just recently listened to his episode featuring Reverend William J. Barber, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber.
Right.
And just, if you are a person who is a little bit like me and rather discouraged by the state of our country, if you will. It's easy to feel real despondent and despair a bit. And it was just really great to listen to Reverend Barber on this episode. He's just super down to earth. I don't know how much of his stuff you've read or listened to, but he's super down to earth, but for a person with his story is still incredibly, it gave me a lot of hope to hear him speak and to really, kind of directly name and address some of the issues that are at work in our country. So In by Brad Jerzak and the With Pod, Why Is This Happening podcast, particularly featuring Reverend Barber, is what I have been watching, what I'm reading, what I'm listening to.
I don't know.
I'm in a funny mood tonight, Reed.
Well, it's a heavy film, so funny's good.
It's all heavy, but
it's all heavy.
You ain't heavy. You my brother.
Aww. I like that song.
Yeah. Clay Cross.
Wow. Wow. Oh my god.
CCM.
Oh my gosh. So Nathan, we are not only in a new episode and in a new year with the dawning of our what will presumably be our 4th anniversary, our 4th year of podcasting, but we are now starting a brand new series. Do you want to talk a little bit about this new exciting, daunting, intimidating venture that we're branching out into?
It is all of those things, my friend. I do. I'm sort of trepidatious, if I'm honest.
Okay,
but
sure. You know what? I'm here with you. It's just you and me talking. It's just you. And me.
I just want to mess up together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we might do that.
Who knows?
Because to some, this might be the moment where the fear of God jumps the shark and finally gets political. But
finally.
Finally, right. At least in a formal capacity. Up till now, it's just been more, circumstantial.
Wow.
We are beginning a series today, guys and gals, called Speaking in Tongues. And, Reed and I have been discussing off-pod for a couple months. Well, the two entwining thoughts here. One is just the name Speaking in Tongues that I'm pretty sure, Reed, that I'll give you credit, you had developed a little while back.
Thank you.
That finally hit pay dirt with this concept we're executing on today, beginning today. So I think I won't speak for you, but I think at least largely I speak for you philosophically that the things that are happening at the United States and Mexico border are very distressing and very disheartening and very discomforting. And there are many ways where it is very challenging in the endless of our day to day to know how and what to do. About that.
Yeah.
And so an exciting aspect to Speaking in Tongues is if you haven't checked the TeePublic Fear of God landing page in a while, we kind of low key released a couple of new designs.
Oh yeah.
And so those are really fun, aren't they? Shout out Jacob Hunt.
Man, they're great.
Jacob Hunt, you now, ladies and gentlemen, can own your very own That Ain't Right Fear of God t-shirt.
That's so awesome.
Isn't it? It's so fun.
My wife just bought a shirt that says on it, "Y'all need Jesus," and I want to wear my That Ain't Right t-shirt and her wear her "Y'all Need Jesus" t-shirt.
Yeah, there's some weird messaging happening there. I don't
so
totally
great.
know how to parse that. Although it is funny as a little asterisk. Just recently, I was my 8-year-old and I had some kind of daily errand adventures we were doing. And I introduced her to the concept of that ain't right. And I was like,
boy.
It's hot outside. This is when you say that ain't right. So now she will occasionally drop a that ain't right on me.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So there are a couple of new designs. The short of it is, for the entirety of the series, Speaking in Tongues, and we'll unpack some of this in a second, when you purchase a piece of Fear of God merchandise, a portion of those proceeds sold during that are going to go to the Florence Project. Reed and I deliberated over this a little bit and found some organizations that we thought well represented what we were after. And the Florence Project is just one of those, of many. But the Florence Project specifically provides free legal and social services to detained men, women, and children under threat of deportation. And this is not just timely, but particularly timely to this recording because it was just announced today that detained families can now be held indefinitely.
Yeah.
So that is a national sin that we'll have to reckon with for years to come. But so the notion of tackling this idea as a substream to a conversation series, Speaking in Tongues, we really wanted to, and what we are doing is tackling foreign language films, not just international films, not just non-United States based productions, but specifically foreign language films. And how I want to set this up a little bit, and then I promise I'll quit talking, but it was unintentional, much like reading Universal Christ and suddenly having conversations in Hereditary and Annihilation relevant to it in this book and I'll set this up and as just perhaps read, if I can, as a thesis for this whole idea. I want to read briefly two little notes from it. In the book, Jersak defines inclusion. He's very intentional about defining what that means, and I'm going to read this definition, and then I'm going to read another little section. So Jersak defines this way. He says, Trinitarian inclusion is not necessarily universalism, which is a word people use like a bludgeon. Though some Trinitarians are universalists, I am not, he says. But my inclusivism means that I hope, pray, and preach that all will ultimately see and respond to the revelation of Christ in them as they discover they have already been forgiven and reconciled to God through the work of Christ. Second, for me, our inclusion into the life of the Trinity must also become manifest through the full and practical inclusion of diverse people at Christ's open table. Who is welcome? Who belongs? Who is included? All who were in Adam. All for whom Christ came. All whom Christ has invited. All for whom Christ has died. A table too small for the least and the lost is not the table of the Lord. So that's a definition of inclusion, how it's used in this book. What sparked specifically for me Speaking in Tongues, and Reed, I apologize, you didn't know I was going to do all this because we got a lot to get to, but
it's okay.
In one section that is in this book, Jersak interviews a couple named Jamie and Donna Winship, who operate an organization directly reaching out to Muslims. It's not in the U.S. I just have a screenshot, so I can't go back and forth to know exactly where it's at, but it's in one of the Middle Eastern countries. And in interviewing, so what I'm about to read is the response of a question Jersak asked.
Okay.
Taken slightly out of context, but it's going to make sense in a second. So this gentleman, Jamie Winship, says, we're often told or raised to think that my identity or my group is the best right group. And so when we meet another person from another background or another group, the message to them is if you want to live in the kingdom, you have to be like me. You have to leave your group and come into my group in order to come into the kingdom. That message does one thing in the world. It produces conflict and is not the straight way that Jesus talks about. And this particularly is what I really wanted to hone in on. Here is the reality of what Jesus is saying. You can be who you are and walk in your own identity through Jesus straight into the kingdom. That is the amazing thing. And although there is only one way to the Father through Jesus, Jesus is on every road. And for me personally, that phrasing, Jesus is on every road, is an important and significant benchmark as we sort of engage these notions from, we're going to be talking about films from all over the world. We are going to be donating portions of what you purchase in terms of merchandise to the Florence Project. Because Jesus is on every road, and
Amen.
We are not allowed to take people from the road, as it were.
Right.
So anyway, I hope that was a permissible way to springboard us into this brand new series that is, yes, intimidating and daunting.
Certainly. Can I we have a ton to get to. I have two things. Maybe will bring us up a little bit more into the shallows, just because but it's what I think about whenever I hear a phrase like Jesus is on every road. Or do you remember the Doug TenNapel graphic novel Creature Tech? Do you remember that? Yeah. Do you remember that moment? There's a moment where, because the premise of it is that it's a very inventive, kind of fantastical book. It's a graphic novel, but a character comes in contact with a parasitic alien being. And there is a moment where this character has a vision of this parasitic alien's home planet, and when he's looking at it, everybody on this, foreign alien planet is, of the type of this parasitic alien. They look like it and everything. And he looks up, and it's the way that I say it, it's going to sound a little silly, but in the context of the book and when it appears, I think it's pretty profound and pretty affecting. He looks up and he sees an image of an the alien form crucified on like a top of a hill and everything, and the main character looks and says, I forget what his prefix statement is, but he says, something like, "Oh my God," he says, "You're here too," and it was just, I mean, like, and it really affected me. There's a similar moment in William Peter Blatty's film and novel. The novel is called something Killer Kane, Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane, I think. But the movie is called The Ninth Configuration, and there's an image in this movie that I love, and it's an image of the famous astronaut planting an American flag on the moon. And the astronaut plants an American flag on the moon, but when the astronaut has done that and kind of claimed it, he turns around, and when he turns around, right behind him is a cross. And I just, it's powerful. There's not a ton of commentary in the context of the film because the film's very metaphorical as it was. But I love that image of like somebody coming and saying like, okay, I'm staking my claim here, and turn around and find like, oh, you're here too, like you're already here. So that's I just wanted to say like those are the kind of things that I think about when I hear statements like Jesus is on every road, and just the preeminence of that presence and how much I believe that. And so
relevant too. But I'm going to drag us even more into the shallows here. Although I appreciate your offering there. You made me think of this talking about the Creature Tech, which, yes, I knew when you brought that up. I was like, yeah. Jesus on every road. Jesus on every planet. Jesus on every planetary body. Recently, I work in a sales environment, and so it isn't an environment just sort of prone to depth, if you will.
Oh, okay.
Conversationally, it's often, speaking of shallows, can be quite that. And I was running late for a senior staff meeting recently, which sounds even more professional than it really is based on where the story's about to go. And most of the guys I work with know, although I am Mr. Progressive or whatever on the podcast verbally, but in general life, like if you ask me questions, I'll answer them, but I'm rarely going to offer it unless I think I'm principally being, unless something ethically is afoot, right? Or wrong. So I walk into this senior staff meeting a little late, and clearly business is being talked about. I'm just kidding. Business is not being talked about. And the boss, it's like, "Oh, Nathan's here. Let me ask you a question." I was like, like literally I walked in, and I am not making this up. These were the questions. And to set the stage a little bit, one of my good friends who I referenced on the coworker I referenced who says, "I haven't met Christians like you," that person, that was about 4 episodes ago.
Right.
Anyway, so he's sitting in there, and I sit down next to him, and the boss is like, "Let me ask you a question." Like, okay, yeah, I'm just walking through the door here. He's like, "Do you think aliens are real?"
Oh my gosh.
Really. And I was like, okay, here's where we're at. And just happy Monday morning. And I said, I think it's possible. I don't know. Maybe. And then his follow-up question was, well, do you think the existence of aliens would make the Bible not true?
Oh my gosh.
And I said, no, not at all. And you could tell it was just like brain melting that I responded that way. And my buddy that I'm referencing from my former reference on the podcast, you could tell he was like, well, Nathan's not like the other Christian people. You know, it's like, it was like they were trying to get this point proven, and I was the bad test case to ask. You know, it's like, no. Extraterrestrials means the Bible's fake. You know,
oh
like
my
whatever.
gosh.
This
Wow.
idea.
Yes.
So now that we are back at the beach, we are no longer in the depths whatsoever.
True.
You know,
True.
Now are you ready?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Yes.
you've missed it. We know you have. It's time once again for hashtag TV guideposts. This time with an accompanying hashtag Netflix and chills, because we are going into the German series Dark. We're going to go a little dark, but don't worry. We'll bring you back up to the light soon enough. So why don't we dive into the first 2 episodes of the Netflix original series Dark.
Dude.
I'm just gonna let Dark like sort of linger.
Yeah.
It's funny because
Dark.
the music's all light and fluffy and airy and everything, but I feel like it should just take this sort of ominous tone towards the. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't think that's going to happen. But anyway, so this is unique for us. This is different.
Yes. This is exciting.
Most of the time, when we engage with material, I am on my second or sometimes third or
sometimes
viewing.
fourth.
Yes, multiple viewings. This is an instance where I had the opportunity to sort of, prep and consider whatever. I'm actively choosing. You have seen this before. I am actively choosing to wait and experience it as we go through it. So I have only seen the first 2 episodes of this series. I will watch it as we unpack it through this series. So season 1 of Dark, I have seen the first 2 episodes.
Yeah. I mean, like, even today, I think I tried to call you at one point just to kind of talk about our recording tonight, and have kind of had in my brain, I'm like, I think Reed has watched Dark. I hope he didn't forget, because we just we haven't spoken verbally in a while. And then I was like, screw it, this will be fun. So like, yeah, I've seen season 1. I have not watched season 2. So when we get there, that'll be fresh for both of us.
Thankfully, the reviews are very positive, so we'll see.
Oh well, good. I haven't. Well, see, you've done even more than I have. What do you think? Like 2 episodes in, what are your general takes?
Okay, so I'm very excited about the possibilities of this show. I will be honest that my notes are scant to non-existent at this point.
Sure.
Because not knowing where the show is going, not knowing what sort of threads mean anything at this point, I'm on board with the mystery that they are setting up for me and drawing me into. The loose premise of the show that I can extrapolate at the moment is there's this small town in, is it Austria? Or I believe, I forget exactly where this town is located, but there's a small town, and a child has gone missing. Well, I say child, he's a teenager. Teenager has gone missing. And so this teenager...
Yeah, I've heard of Mikkel, right? He's not a teenager.
No, Mikkel is not, but Eric is.
Right.
And so, like...
Eric, the redhead.
Yeah, Eric has gone missing. And there are these caves on the outskirts of town in this forested area that, has an ominous sort of quality to it. It's next to a nuclear power plant, and so there's all kinds of things that the series is sort of establishing at this point. But Eric has gone missing. We, the audience, can see that Eric is alive somewhere, but he's in like this room, and a couple of times he gets strapped to this chair, and we don't quite know what's going on. I don't know quite what's going on at this moment. Well, then, this is all in the first episode, then another child that we have come to know through the course of the episode named Mikkel, he also goes missing in very much the same fashion that Eric under similar circumstances in which Eric has lost. And there's all these characters that I know are going to sort of be connected. There's an affair going on. There's some infidelity. There's this one family is sort of tendrilled out to a couple of other relationships. So I know things are going to unpack as they go along. But these first couple of episodes just sort of set the stage. I really like the tone. I really like the pacing. The performances are really strong, even out the gate. And so, I'm excited for the fact that this is I have not dug into specifics, but the fact that I know it is a critically praised show, beloved by viewers apparently as well. It has been renewed for a season 3, which they've said,
oh, really? I didn't know that.
Which they've said will be the final season.
Cool.
So there's a lot of excitement about what they could be bringing up in here. But yeah, I'm on board.
Well, and to contextualize, if if listeners haven't or aren't going to watch this, although I would encourage it, having, at least for me, watched the first season, it is very compelling. But it came out, I don't have this chronology in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it came out within 6 to 8 months of at least Stranger Things season 2, if not 1.
Oh,
because
okay.
It had at least the things I was engaging that were talking about it when it released were contextualizing it as sort of a quote unquote smarter Stranger Things. Like it's just more.
Okay.
That's, which isn't meant to be like Stranger Things is stupid.
It's not
just,
a ding. No, I understand.
Yeah. Stranger Things has a little bit of populist kind of like popcorny to it. You reference this, like it is a sprawling, like, I don't know if you had this experience. I remember the first time watching it being like, my head is spinning from the number of characters.
There's a massive amount of characters.
Well, probably the first 3 or 4 episodes, it just keeps widening. Like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Although, let's jump to the ends of episode 2 and then double back a little bit. So,
okay.
Remember how last week with The Endless, I said, because of the sequence of things, I watched The Endless earlier than our recording?
You did Dark too, didn't you? Yeah, that's funny.
Oh, brother. I mean, I watched season 1 when it first released, and then on a lark, because I was like, oh, we're going to be tracking through Dark. There's a lot of, it's not a lot of episodes, but it's hour-long episodes, and we're doing 2 per recording. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to get a little ahead. Not even paying attention to the calendar. And so I rewatched episodes 1 and 2 like 5-6 weeks ago now. Like, so it's been,
gosh. Okay,
I've got notes and I know the loose tone and arc, but remind me where episode 2 ends.
So episode 2 ends with the revelation. So Mikkel has gone missing, and I guessed that some version of time travel was going to be involved. I shouldn't say time travel like Back to the Future stuff, but like time anomalies was going to be involved when Mikkel, who is a budding magician, in the first episode, and I'll tell you where episode 2 ends in a second, when he is showing a trick to his father, Ulrich, and it's this little like cup and ball trick where, like, you cover a ball with a cup and then it magically appears into another cup and through sleight of hand and everything. And so then the father asks, like, wow, how did you do that? And then Mikkel says back to him, the question is not how, but when. And so that's when the first pinged me of like, I bet time distortion or time anomalies are going to be sort of at play here, because it was a very like deliberate line. Well, sure enough, episode 2 ends with Mikkel making he's been missing for like since the end of episode 1 all through episode 2. Where is he? This stranger character wearing the cloak puts up the headline that says, where is Mikkel? And crosses out the word where and writes, when is Mikkel? And then sure enough, Mikkel trots out of the cave back into the forest, runs back home, and when he knocks on the door, because the door won't open for him, when he knocks on the door, he sees a teenage version of his father exit the door, looks down at the newspaper, sees the report about the Chernobyl disaster, and that the newspaper reads that it is 1986. And the episodes before that were very deliberate to show that we are in like late 2019 the present for the film. So Mikkel has somehow, through the events of this mystical or paranormal cave or whatever, has found his way into 1986, and so that's where it ends.
Did you, going into the series, did you have any clue of time travel?
I knew nothing about it.
Okay,
I knew nothing about it except I had heard similar echoes to what you alluded to about, like, this is akin to Stranger Things, but a little bit more cerebral, a little bit more intellectual. And so that was all I knew. I did not know that time travel was a factor.
Well, it's funny because, and rewatching these first 2 episodes, again, it's been a while since I've rewatched them, but almost from the first establishing shot of whatever happens in episode 1, it's all over it. Like, there are twists yet to come for you.
Oh, okay.
In season 1, but in terms of just like that time travel plays a role, it's pretty much in your face from go.
Oh,
but
interesting.
Not knowing that, I was real emotionally wrapped up in Mikhail's disappearance.
Oh,
and so
sure.
The first time watching it, and so when that pivot happens at the end of episode 2, I was blown away. I was like,
wow.
Whoa,
okay.
this is, I did not see this coming.
Sure.
So no, I really love it. I think it is, I would say it might be challenging because it is so densely populated. You know, there's a lot of characters and a lot of relationships. Like this second time through, I was writing down character names and their connections to each other. Like,
interesting. Okay, sure.
There's the parental generation of the kid characters. There's the elder generation who are the parents of those kid characters' parents. Like, there's a lot of deep stuff. So, I mean, I don't have a ton. Well, I guess, I've got a ton of just plotting notes because I wanted to try to remember the story elements.
Okay.
But, I love that score, that opening credit score.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. The opening credits in general with all the mirror imagery and everything is really effective. It's really great.
Well, and just the general tone. I think the tone, it is, as the title of the series suggests, it's dark, but it doesn't feel nihilistic or anything like that. It's just kind of,
I understand.
I don't know, like camping out with your buddies around a campfire kind of vibe, like this.
Sure. Oh, sure.
Anyway, so I really enjoy it. I don't have if you got more specifics you want to talk about.
Well, no, not really, because I will be honest that at this point, everything feels very stage setting for me. And that's okay. Like, I'm really enjoying it. But yeah, episode 1 is just very much sort of establishing these interpersonal relationships with everybody. The police officer who's having the affair with the parent of this person, and so, like, all of these different relationships I recognize are going to have some significance. I just have no context for how yet. So I'm really enjoying the series. Yes, somehow Mikhail has popped out of the cave. He's back in 1986. I'm thrilled to see over the course of the next few episodes of this series, this Speaking in Tongues series. I'm curious to see where the show heads. And yes, that'll do it for me.
I suppose we should offer this if you want, kind of how we're structuring Speaking in Tongues.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, we are going to be doing. It's going to be an interesting structure, more or less, the rest of the year for Fear of God. But we are going to think about how we did previous TV guideposts, Ash vs. Evil Dead and Haunting of Hill House. So we'll do 4 foreign language films, starting today with The Wailing, with 2 episodes each of Dark Season 1, culminating in 1 episode fully engaging Dark Season 1.
Yes.
We will then take October. What are we doing in October, Reed? We should probably start spitting out some surveys.
Yes. So basically in October, and we will start putting the surveys out to you this week or next. But we are going to be doing, in our recent tradition, we're going to be doing hashtag I love the 70s, arguably the greatest generation for horror, not because of how many horror films came out, but because of how many masterful horror films came out in the 70s. So I'm very curious to see how our listeners are going to shape these up. And as we have done traditionally, in October, we will be covering some entries from your top 10 of hashtag I love the 70s. So, yes.
So for September, we're doing Speaking in Tongues Part 1. We're taking a break in October to cover I Love the 70s. We are returning to Speaking in Tongues in November to more or less mirror Phase 1. So 3 or 4 foreign language films with Dark Season 2 accompanying it, finishing with Dark Season to fully an episode from Fear of God. And then we'll get to December when we get there. But point
absolutely.
being, we are going to be walking through this series. What'll be fun for you is the way season 1 ends will propel you to rewatch season 1. I haven't done that until now. I mean, just because
awesome.
It is a very tightly wound, meticulously plotted show. And
awesome. Okay.
There will come a point where you'll start to sort of suss out certain things, but that won't really sour any reveals to come. But
understood.
But no, it's a good show. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'm glad that we're doing this. So
awesome.
Are you ready to wail, buddy?
Yes. So let's formally go ahead and do it. So that concludes yet another installment of #TV Guideposts. Didn't go too dark today, but we did do 2 episodes of Dark. And so next week, join us for 2 more of the Netflix original TV series, Dark. And I got nothing much else to say about that. We'll see you next week on #TV Guideposts. I'm just going to fade out.
Wow. Wow. You are speaking a foreign language right now, brother.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So, okay, so formally wrapping up this installment of TV Guideposts, something that I want to do, something that we have not mentioned yet on how Speaking in Tongues is going to work is we were pretty intentional, sometimes painfully so, in we're going to be covering a different language, a different nation, a different geographical region for every episode. And so in that spirit, some of these entries, like when we go, for instance, The Wailing is a Korean film, specifically from South Korea, and it is very difficult because there's some great films that also came out of South Korea that it's hard to choose which one you're going to cover. So with each installment, before we dive into the film proper, I'm just going to briefly recommend 1 or 2 additional films from this region that I think listeners should check out. Some of the recommendations are going to be cautious and with asterisks. Some of them are going to be full-bodied and hearty. But with this particular one, the hands-down most popular, most successful, and many consider one of the greatest horror films to come out of Korea was in fact Train to Busan, which we've done.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which we've done a full episode about. You can go back and listen to that. Check out that film.
It's a good movie.
Yes, so kind of a soft recommendation to there. I am going to formally recommend by the same director the prequel to Train to Busan, Seoul Station, which is an animated film that takes place either the night before or like 2 nights before the events of Train to Busan. It's a darker film. It is a bit heavier, but it is very powerful. It does not pack the wallop that Train to Busan does, either for thrills or emotional impact, but it is very, very strong. It's very good. So I'd highly recommend Seoul Station.
It'd be really great if it was called Car to Train to Busan. Like this people driving to the
Uber
station.
to Train to Busan, Uber to car to bus to boat. To
Right. You got it.
So Seoul Station, I would highly recommend that film. Also, I would recommend, but this is a cautious recommendation, I would also recommend a film called I Saw the Devil. The reason it's a cautious recommendation is because Nathan Rouse, it is a very powerful film. It's very affecting. We may eventually get to covering it at some point, but I cannot stress enough how heavy and challenging the film is to watch. It is very, very difficult to sit through, both for its graphic violence, the general heaviness of its themes. It is a difficult film to watch, but it is a powerful film. And if you can stomach it, and that is a very big if you can stomach it, I think it is worth seeing because it is very affecting in the kinds of ways that people who can engage comfortably with challenging cinema will find some rich rewards in it. So that film is called I Saw the Devil. And it is also comes out of South Korea, and The Wailing is its own version of challenging, which we'll get into. But I wanted to give a couple of recommendations. Train to Busan, of course, Seoul Station, and I Saw the Devil are also from this same country, and they're also very powerful and affecting films, and I highly recommend them.
Well, I appreciate you as a person. I appreciate you as our curator of the films we're going to be covering. You do a lot of legwork, and I'm appreciative of that. In the spirit of that, like, what was your experience with The Wailing before this? Had you seen it?
So it was very. I had seen it. It was very. It had made a lot of buzz when it came out. When it was first released in 2016. So what's interesting is that films that make it over to American markets from foreign countries, many of them, it's like sometimes they have a reputation where it's like, oh man, foreign films are so much better. What we forget is that with some exceptions, like films that really make a big splash here are of the high quality, of the high caliber. You know, there's tons produced in nations all over the world. But when a film from a foreign country makes it over here, then a lot of times it is because it is so highly critically praised. It is so highly popular. So when The Wailing came over, I first spotted it on Netflix and heard about it. There was a lot of buzz surrounding it. I didn't know much of anything about the story, but I checked it out when it was there and was very affected by it. I was really taken with it from first viewing. It is a daunting length because it is not only 2.5 hours, it is bordering on 2 hours and 40 minutes. So it is a daunting sort of runtime, but I found it very, very affecting. I was impressed that it deals so directly with spiritual themes. Again, that's not a prerequisite for my enjoying a film, but I appreciate a film that does not shy away from that kind of symbolism and that kind of exploration. So I was appreciative of that. I have some quotes from the director that I will introduce at some point in the conversation. But yeah, so I watched it on Netflix. I was very taken with it. I did purchase it, and so I was thrilled and excited there was a lot of debate about what would launch the series of Speaking in Tongues, and we debated about a few films here and there. When I finally pushed and said I want to start with The Wailing, one rewatch of it, again, just made me so glad and thrilled that I did, because I was really excited to revisit this film, and obviously we'll get into a lot of different things. But yeah, that's my history with it.
Very cool. Yeah, I was totally unfamiliar with it going in, and
knew nothing about the premise or anything, right?
No.
Yeah.
And it's funny because your reference just now to leading with it, when you pitched it as the opener to Speaking in Tongues, just I didn't know what to expect. I was like, okay, well, what's that going to be about? And I'm a little curious to hear you articulate once we get closer into thematic stuff, kind of what drove you to, okay, this is why I think it's a good launch pad. But I mean, it's as a brief little summary, and it's a pretty densely
complex
film.
Yeah.
But the short of it is the lead character is this cop, and he lives in this kind of provincial little Korean, kind of fishing town, effectively.
Yeah.
And you just get the feeling that's a very small sort of region, and citizens of this kind of village start succumbing to these really it's almost like zombie type movie, like, in other words, so as an investigator, as a policeman, he just shows up to these crime scenes that
sure,
this person went crazy and killed their family. That happens iteratively multiple times in the film,
right.
So as the story starts to narrow, certain characters present as, is this person causing this? So it's got a bit of mystical kind of supernaturality to it, but you don't really get into that until late in it. But again, it's 2.5 hours long. I thought this watching it. I was like, this could have been, and I'm sure when Dumb Americans adapt it, it will be like that. That was unfairly pejorative. I'm sorry.
I don't know. I'll finish your statement, and then
all I was going to say is, like, the movie itself feels like a miniseries or like a season of TV, because so much happens in it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of every 20 minutes, you're kind of turning a corner into a whole new chunk of story.
Absolutely.
And so all I was saying is, I'm sure when we adapt it, it's going to be like the padded, 10 episode, hour-long episodes, like, just ridiculousness.
Well, honestly, I would prefer that adaptation to what I think is more likely, which will be some, sort of pared down, two hour theatrical release, which, the reason I didn't balk so highly at your sort of dumb remake. I let it not be said, I am on record on the podcast with our episode saying I am in the rare minority that prefers the American Matt Reeves directed Let Me In to Let the Right One In. I am in the minority on that camp, and I embrace that. That's understandable. And I think there have been some remakes that have been very successful in doing some creative, inventive things. I think a lot of that depends on the director. But this is a film that does feel very of... What's weird is it feels of its place, although granted, I'm so woefully ignorant of Korean culture myself.
Right.
Even making a statement like that feels arrogant and a bit beyond my depth. But this feels...
Well, I think what you're trying to say is appropriate, that it feels of a place.
Yes, very specific.
It feels rooted to a specific context.
But in the same way, it also is this blend of these different, particularly religious practices and religious notions that are melding together in with one another. There's a primitive sort of shamanism that is at play in the film directly, but also some overt expressions of Christianity, which I find very fascinating. And so I feel like when it gets Americanized, depending on who does it, and depending on what they approach it with, I don't know if they're going to be willing to bring the depth of boldness of having in a similar way that part of what I admire about The Wicker Man is that it takes both paganism and Christianity very seriously. There's some challenges people have to the way that film ends, but I think it's undeniable that the breadth of the film, it's treating those respective disciplines, perspectives very seriously. And I feel like this film does the same thing with its subject matter. And I feel like that's something that once it gets studiofied and once it gets Americanized, begins to dilute a lot for the sake of plot and spectacle. And so that's why I'm not balking too much at I don't want a remake of this. This film is something that, skipping to my end, I love this film. And I feel like in its present form is one of the most ideal ways to experience this film. And so, I would groan a little bit.
In your defense, I mean, Let Me In is an uncommonly good remake.
It is. It really is. Can I read just... I'm so torn about whether or not to share these thoughts from the director that I found, that I stumbled across out the gate, or to do them in theme. I'll parse them in as I can. I only have one trivial bit to this, and I think it's really fun, only because we just so recently covered Hereditary. Ari Aster officially, the director of Hereditary, officially cited this as his favorite horror film of the past 10 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He adores this film and heaped a ton of praise on it. I think they had asked him, what are some of his favorites or whatever, but he cited The Wailing as his favorite horror film of the past 10 years.
Well, it's funny because I think there's a lot of parallels to Hereditary. I mean, it's a supernatural noose tightening around a family unit.
Yeah, absolutely. And these ideas of deception and these ideas of being led into places that you don't really know if these places are safe or trustworthy or who to trust. And there's a lot going on in that. I think what's fascinating, this is kind of getting into likes, dislikes, unless you have some specific trivia bits.
Please.
So I do love the film. I feel like that you referenced this with Dark just a few moments ago, that when you get to the end, it's going to make you want to watch the whole thing again.
Yes.
I feel like The Wailing absolutely does that to you.
Definitely.
Once you see the ending of and we're talking about a 2 hour and 40-minute film. Once you see the final beats of the film, given time and space, are almost immediately like, I have got to see that again. Anyway.
There's that verbal response, and then there's the verbal response that I basically had, which was, dadgummit. Because there's
no
so
time.
much that's well, not just there's no time. Yes, that's the bottom line ultimately, but just this notion of the desire to, but just
of course,
I can't jump right back into this.
And
I want to
say, and I will say, this is only my second time through, but man, it holds up. It's rewarding. There's a lot here. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because my notes, and I'll share them as we go, track along the path of ignorance to the narrative. And so,
sure.
you know,
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Dude.
someone who's seen this movie multiple times will hear a note and be like, "You dummy!" I'm like, well, these are first responses to the as you go watching.
No, of course. And oh my gosh, like little things like it opens up with that biblical passage from Luke where Jesus is saying, does a ghost have flesh and blood as I have? See it as I myself, and which plays very heavily into the final moments of the film.
Sure.
But then the very first opening shot we have, Nathan, is of that Japanese man putting a worm onto a hook, baiting. And I'm just like, and I was sitting there watching and I was like, oh my God, it's right here, right from the beginning. Like that man baiting something and that how that carries through in the remainder of the film. So yes, it is a film that highly rewards looking back at it in the fresh context that you have with what happens at the end of the film, which we will spoil, by the way. If you have any interest in seeing this film, if you've been meaning to, we don't often say this because it is pretty obvious, but we're going to spoil elements of this film that I think you need to experience them the way this film gives them to you. So watch this film. I do highly recommend it. Seek it out, see it, come back to our conversation because we're gonna spoil all of it.
Well, and you just made a note that I want to talk about a little bit. You referenced specifically the Japanese man. So in the context of the film, and this is when I say I was watching it with an eye towards, I wondered why Reed chose this one as an initial choice. Part of it was the stranger in our midst kind of idea because. And I wouldn't have known this, and I'm basing this take on the film itself, not so much my knowledge of Asian cultural interactions, but the characters in this Korean fishing town speak very pejoratively of this Japanese man who is kind of camping out in the region for an extended time and continue to do so. And it's clear there's suspicion and kind of friction, perhaps ethnicity-wise, between Korean folk and at least this Japanese guy, if not maybe Japanese people in general. So that becomes kind of an undergirding aspect. Suspicion of the other kind of idea. Although, like, for all of the horrific places this movie goes, we reference in passing, but so it is clear, it kind of primarily focuses on this family, this husband, his wife, their daughter, Hoojin, and the grandmother who lives with him. Yes. And Hoojin is this super sweet kid that takes a real sour turn. It's sad. But for all the horror in this movie, that daughter seeing her parents have sex in the car, now that's a nightmare. That is a nightmare. Oh my gosh.
It's so crazy. And then when he looks over and catches it.
So that is horrific. I am in terror just thinking about that.
Oh
happening.
my gosh. When he turns around and just gasps uproariously
it's great.
Like, how long has he been there?
Doesn't he keep barking at her to go away or something? Like
Yes. It's pretty hysterical. And then later they're calm by the river and he's all like, so how much did you see?
Right.
It's pretty
and
funny.
then he's like, you saw all of it, didn't you?
What's funny?
What? Tell me.
Sorry to cut you off, but there's a surprising amount of humor in the first third of this film. Like, it's pretty comical.
I referenced that multiple times, that this kind of undertone of comedy and or dark comedy in places. I love, and it doesn't hurt that I have 3 of them, but I love the relationship of him to the daughter. It is.
Yes, yeah.
It is. Yeah. It's beautiful and sweet when it's supposed to be, and it's terrible and tragic when it's supposed to be.
It really is. Yeah.
And but it's most exemplified.
Oh boy.
When she shows up at the precinct with his clothes.
Yeah.
And the note I wrote, Reed, was, no, but really, who farted? There's this great bit. You ought to watch the film. It is a very strong film, but there's this great bit where they've got he and the daughter have this playful relationship. He's gotten in a mess, has kind of gotten dirty from a crime scene.
Yeah,
is back at the precinct. The mother sends her to bring him new clothes, and there's just this shot that holds this wide shot of a couple other cops in the precinct, he and her in the background, and you just hear this extended flatulence. And then she just has this little grin, and that's the end of the scene. It is lovely.
Yes. Oh, yeah, it's so great. And that is something that I really appreciate about it, even in subsequent viewings. It does take this steady flow where in the first maybe hour of the film, there's a lot of laced-in humor. And there's a specific scene, and I like the scene. It's a very powerful scene. It's a devastating scene, particularly in the context of the film. But when he confronts the Japanese man, they call him...
That's rough.
Like, this man comes in. I've seen him. So what's interesting about it, in the context of the film, they use a derogatory term. But when I hear interviews or when I read interviews about the way that the film crew refer to him, they refer to him as the stranger. That's what they refer to him as. And that is part of what I think is crucial to understanding what the ultimate conceit of the film is. But they speak very derogatorily to him. This man comes, and this police officer, our main character, comes, and he's upset because he's seen the possession and he's seen all of the different elements in the city, and these people, sort of losing their minds, getting possessed in a sort of zombie-esque fashion. They break out in these boils, and he's starting to see this thing happen to his daughter. And prime suspect number one is this Japanese stranger that's been in their midst. And so when the police officer goes and confronts him about it, it's that hideous ratcheting up of the violence. And when he's amping that up, it culminates into like the destruction of the man's property, and it culminates into him literally like mortally wounding the man's dog, and it's hideous.
Yeah, I wrote the note. I wrote that. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I didn't know if you're aiming for a better point that I was hijacking.
No.
Right there, I said, I don't know, man. I feel bad for this guy, but you don't go and kill a man's dog. That ain't right.
No, that ain't right.
Right.
That ain't right. And so that's the thing that, like, that's the moment watching it this time through that the humor sort of stops. From that point on, and that's a little over an hour into the film, from that point on, the humor is no longer laced in what's happening. It gets heavier, it gets darker, it gets rougher. And it all sort of pivots and hinges on that moment. And you find out later in the film that moment kind of was the thing that really sort of sealed this man's fate in him being locked into this confrontation. So yeah, it's pretty rough. It's a pretty devastating moment.
Speaking of the humor, you'll appreciate this, and I hope recognize the layered nature of these references. You mentioned the people when they get sick, they get these boils and or rashes, and I wrote these poor folks with their rashes. I mean, I've had rashes in my armpits, on my butt cheeks, on my gonads.
That's awesome. Oh man!
But I love backing up a hair just because you're highlighting the humor aspect. I loved the moment. I wrote this note. His partner. I wrote that.
Yes.
I love what tonally feels a little like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern with these two like bumbling cops. They're kind of in over their head while the periphery of their world is falling apart. But this is exemplified where they go to interview. He's not a suspect, but he's been attacked by someone in the woods. That's what it was.
Oh,
and
okay.
They reference the naked man wandering the woods, which
Yes.
we haven't even talked about. But that he's in a diaper. So this person they're interviewing referenced the old man in the diaper. And
Right.
And these two cop characters, one of whom is our primary lead, start engaging this conversation about the need for adults to have diapers. And it's like, and I love it because the two lines I wrote, one of them says, bladder control problems are surprisingly common in adults. And then the other one says, but why go into the woods to treat incontinence?
They're taking the conversation very seriously.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I wonder
It's
why.
hilarious.
I don't understand. Oh, man, it's great.
Well,
Yeah,
do you
Go
get
ahead.
the impression, so a character that gets introduced middle of the film, basically, is the shaman the family calls into the story
yes.
to kind of, the grandmother has
The grandmother
been
was the one
contact
that suggested
point,
it.
right?
Yeah.
So they bring in this shaman whose intention is, because Hoojin, the daughter, is getting progressively worse. And like, that's heartbreaking. I texted you in the middle of the road or the middle of the movie. I was like, this is going to be bad. Like, this is not.
Yeah.
Because the second she starts getting sick, you're like, oh man, this sucks. So they call in this shaman, and who knows, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but what is bubbly humor on the first half of the movie, call me crazy, but the cacophony and the ostentatiousness of the death hex
Yes.
has almost like a darkly comic undertone to it. It's so
sure. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if I was just crazy. I'm not like laughing, but it's so his outfit and the sustained volume of what's happening in that scene is so. I don't know. It was just interesting to me.
And what's fascinating to me about that, first of all, the trivial bit, that actor. In the film, it is broken up by several different point of view shots, and it is broken up by several. It's intercutting with the exorcism that he is performing, but also the stranger, the Japanese stranger, is also performing a ritual of sorts, and it is juxtaposing the two moments together. But when the actor performed that, the actor performed it all in one unbroken take. That they then
the young shaman, not
the young shaman.
okay.
Yeah, the young shaman performed that entire thing, like rehearsed it a couple of times and performed it in an unbroken take. I don't know if the intention was continuity purposes or fervor or energy or whatever it was. So that sequence and most of what they use of that is he really is sort of in the throes of that. And I do think what's funny is I do think there's a darkly comic tone to it. But I think there was a direct intention in the same way, man, I didn't expect to bring up the Wicker Man so much, but in the same way that we would view like the dancing around the maypole stuff in Wicker Man as, we kind of approach that humorously. That is part of its taking the paganism there very seriously. And in the same way, this film, like that shaman ritual, the execution of the chickens and then the eventual attempt at executing the goat, like those are elements of, at least mythologically, that culture and that sort of religious ritual that I feel like it is. It's like you view it and you kind of feel that it's a little absurd or you feel a little silly by it, but part of it is their deep commitment to just sort of expressing this. I do want to read one quote. So there's a great interview that the playlist.net did with the director of The Wailing. If you Google search it, you should be able to find it pretty easily. But the director in this interview in the playlist, there's a specific thing that they asked where it says, the scene with the shaman casting the hex is instantly iconic, especially with the way it uses very loud drums, energetic editing between the shaman and the stranger. What kind of effect did you want the audience to have with the music and the editing in this particular sequence? And this is the director's response. He says, in an attempt to find primitive religions that still exist, I traveled to many Asian countries, including Korea, to collect information. Every time I witnessed a ritual, whatever the purpose it may be, I experienced heart-bursting excitement followed by serious dizziness, and my reactions would be all but naturally expected from a person watching the offerings burn in licking flames. But I wanted to convey those feelings to the audience by believing and wholly staging that exact value, which has been passed down for thousands of years. The music used in the sequence is played by actual shamans, and all the actions played are the same as in the ritual of exorcism performed in real life. I secretly wondered if any audience would have a seizure or something, but thankfully that didn't happen. His final note on it is he says, ironically, this sequence deals with a situation outside of the biblical context that caused the decline of existing genre of occult. It motivated me to shape The Wailing into an occult film, and the sequence symbolizes the flexibility and differentiated origin from my identity both as Asian and as a Christian. He cites elsewhere that the director the director is a Christian. He cites that elsewhere. I'll maybe quote that a little bit later. But again, this speaks to my broader point being that basically this is, he wanted to treat this seriously. He wanted to approach it seriously. He wanted to present it with a sense of authenticity. And so while, yes, some darkly comic feelings kind of emerge, I do love the weight behind the approach to it, and appreciate that about it.
And that's very informative. And I sincerely didn't mean darkly comic in a dismissive tone or dismissive way. Just it's so
sure.
kind of sensorially overwhelming. You're like,
yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask you: Are you okay if I unpack the plot a bit so that I can ask you some questions about your response to it?
Go ahead.
All right. So we've loosely alluded it's a family caught in the noose of a thing. So the stranger that we keep referencing is suspected of being this negative force and or possibly ghost, as they're talking about. But there's challenges to that notion in various places. Well, peripherally, and I don't know that she even enters until, 20, 30 minutes, like this is a long movie. There's a female character, this young, attractive, but kind of, what might be in a supernatural film seen as the seducer type character, but is kind of
the
playful.
Woman in White?
Yeah. It's kind of playful on the periphery. Like you don't know if this is just a townsperson that's kind of wandering onto these various scenes kind of thing, but starts to recur. And ultimately what kind of reveals itself is a bit of this dualistic Jacob Man in Black and or, devil, maybe Christ figure. I think that's a little strong, but maybe we'll get there. But yeah, I know. I'm not neglecting or rejecting that. Just wrestling.
Sure, no, I understand. Yeah,
there's a lot. Remember, I finished it and I said, "Dadgummit!" Like that's the feeling.
I know.
Well, what you kind of get revealed, I think, and this is sort of where I'm leading to with questions, is this shaman that the grandmother calls in. I think, in the final analysis, feels like is revealed to be, if not directly working with the stranger, who in fact is the bad guy ultimately, is at least supporting by proxy this character. So I guess where I want to go in terms of my question to you is, the first time you saw this, if you can recollect, do you remember the feelings of going through and being like, okay, well, I'm leaning this way, now I'm leaning that way. You know what I mean? Like,
I was, if I understand your question correctly, I was very much on the ride that they were taking me to. I thought that they were about to show me, oh no, it wasn't the stranger the whole time. It was this woman, and the woman was behind it all. And so like when the shaman is having his big freak out and everything, I was on board with the shaman the entire way through and was pretty floored by, oh no, he is not a benevolent being in their life. Like he is a predatory, malevolent figure. I was very floored by that in my first viewing, and it is fascinating watching some of those same scenes where, in your viewing, I would imagine you would view it as something of akin to like a spiritual warfare, maybe not those language, but like he's being attacked by something and is trying to sort of overpower this malevolent thing. You then, when you know what the real conceit is and go back and watch those same scenes, it's like, oh, dang. Like these are the moments when they almost won. It's
well. So I guess then
crazy.
Articulate that a little bit. So like the death hex, and I referred to that phrase twice. They use in the movie. This is what they call the young shaman in to try to exorcise Hujin, but effectively envision like this voodoo-esque, not voodoo the religion, but like what we would call a voodoo doll, but it's like this totem figure.
Yes.
It's like a big piece that he's hammering these kind of giant nails into by the end of it that are affecting that this act is affecting both Hoojin, the little girl, and the stranger. So I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, how do you read that scene? Is it he's just doing enough? Because clearly something's happening to the stranger because of this hex.
Yeah, well, not because of the hex. That's the diversion of the film. That's the misdirection of the film. Because I don't know if you remember it, but immediately following the stranger's sort of he's convulsing and he's going through some pains and stuff like that. That woman is on the outskirts. She's in the woods out there, and we don't see what she's doing out there, but she is there and she is watching him, and he is clearly unnerved by her, which when the film leads you through its misdirection, you begin to think he's unnerved by her because she's really the antagonist of the film.
Right.
Turns out that no, she is the one who's been trying to intercede on this family's behalf. And so the man is the stranger is in there performing his thing. The shaman supposedly in his death hex performing, a supportive measure to that end, and the woman is there kind of undermining what they're doing.
Interesting.
And so that is not at all clear the first time through the film, but knowing who all the players are, when you go back through it again, you're like, oh, and I paid particular attention to that scene. The director is very sort of hands-off with the actions of the woman in white. He does not show us a lot of what she physically does, but he frequently tags in with her continual presence in certain places. And so that pings for you more when you watch it a second time through.
Do you... I didn't look at IMDb to know how they credit the stranger character, but they call her the mysterious woman.
Yes, and they call him Japanese man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's it's
a lot less mystique to that one.
Yeah,
although,
exactly.
I mean, it does kind of make sense, because I guess if you do call him some mystical name, it's going to be a bit of a tell.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, he is, and so that's the thing. So like articulating my other moment too, like there's a moment where the shaman, who presumably thinks he has won, because do you remember the moment when our main character brings his friends back to the home of the stranger?
Oh yeah.
They're going to confront him, and there's that big freaking fight, and it ends with the man being like thrown off of a precipice, and then
are you so there's kind of two throw/falls. There's the
he
cliff
hits their
side.
car, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yes. So when they roll him over the embankment. Yeah.
Immediately after they roll him over the embankment, immediately after it cuts to the shaman with a big look of relief on his face, and he says, "The rat has fallen into the trap." Okay, now. First time viewing, you would think, I did, you probably did as well if you registered that line at all, think, oh, we've won. This thing has happened, and this, because the shaman says out the gate that man is a ghost and he is malevolent intentions and they've got to undo him, right? And so when you think that this threat has been hurled off the cliff, then it would seem the rat has fallen into the trap. Like, the trap has been laid and we're successful.
The rat being the stranger. Is that what you're saying in this context?
That's what you would think. That's the first time through. But again, it's a profound misdirection, because then when the police officer asks the woman in white at the end, why me? Why did he do this? And she tells him point blank, I should have written the quote down, but she tells him point blank, it's because you tried to kill him. Like, and that it was basically because of his choosing of violence and his decision to try to go and to try to threaten and ultimately to try to kill that man. That's what marked him as a prey for this being, which when you look back at that shaman scene after he tries to throw the man off the cliff, you look back at that and the shaman is not referring to the rat falling in the trap, meaning that the stranger has been defeated, but rather now the police officer is in their clutches because of what he has done.
I'm going to add an extra layer to that, because you left out an image, and that is when they, and this is what I thought was being referred to by the rat has fallen into the trap, when they when the group of men roll the stranger over the roadway off the cliff, there's a shot of Jong-gu, which I doubt is how you pronounce it, but that's the dad's name.
Yeah.
There's a shot of him in frame with the mountainside, the forested mountainside in the background, and in the woods you see the woman in white, the mysterious woman.
Ah, yes, yes.
So when he says the rat has fallen into the trap, I thought he was, and I do think this is intentional, that the implication was Jong-gu has accidentally ensnared himself in her.
Yeah, right.
In her designs, you know.
Yes, yes. Which is that the film leads you for most of its runtime.
Totally.
You know?
Well,
Yeah.
and it's so funny because I remember just the arc of the experience of watching it being like, there's no way it's the stranger. It's just it's too easy.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that. But then, and especially during the death hex scene, because I wasn't contextualizing if I even noticed the woman in white present
being
in
there,
the geography.
Right.
But I thought I thought his incantation was an intercession. Because in my head,
of course,
okay, he's ultimately going to be an okay dude. So he was interceding against the death hex. You know, this is how I perceived it.
Yeah, of course.
Do you? There's a lot of. This is a long movie, and there's a lot going on in it. A last little note, and then if you want, we can get into scares or whatever. But I love. It's a really powerful, even though where it goes is even worse. Heartbreaking scene of once Hoojin has been, you think, exorcised in the hospital between the two of them. Are you okay? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
I mean, this, you know, I would be interested in rewatching this because there's such a high bar, you know, not just the runtime, but it is foreign language. You're trying to get your brain on the frequency.
Right,
you know,
of course.
And so there's a way, I think, even some of the emotionality, and you're also trying to understand the tone of what you're watching.
Sure, of course.
Some of the emotionality was a little lost on me, but I would be intrigued to watch it again to kind of pick up some of these nuances. I will tell you this. I texted you at the end of it, which was at like 11:30 last night. I did go back and rewatch most of the final engagement between him and White. Just
sure,
because I was like, I'm not going to rewatch this movie right now, but I kind of got to understand what on earth I just sort of watched. Once you know basically the intentions of the players, it repaints the whole thing.
It really does. It really does. And her final scream when he breaks away from her is all the more devastating when you recognize that she is actually telling the truth and is fighting to save his daughter. It's heartbreaking. It's utterly heartbreaking. And that is something. So I don't have any more likes, dislikes. If you want, we can kind of pivot it into scares. Number one, I think the shots, which you later learn were not dreams, of the man, the stranger in his sort of diaper, if you will, but with those red eyes and the predatory sort of stalking. Those shots are freaky. Like some of those sequences are really harrowing. So yeah, I get really unnerved by those.
Well, I guess that is, and this is not the way I'm going to introduce this. Sounds like a ding against the movie. I don't mean that. It's just trying to wrestle my comprehension of it. But I those were hard because that's why it felt like, oh, well, one, there were moments where I couldn't tell if it was the same actor, not because, just because I'm like, well, it's clearly an older person. That's an older person. Are these the same people? Are we supposed to be thinking this is the same person? I'm pretty sure this is not a dream, at least in total. You know, I don't know. I was confused for the first kind of half hour. Like, it was kind of hard to figure out what I was watching.
Sure. No, I understand. But yeah, those shots are very, very unnerving, unsettling. The entire sequence where the rejuvenated man from the truck comes and attacks the posse.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is a nerve-wracking scene.
What I wrote down at that moment was zombies, demons, ghosts, animal mutilation. This movie has everything.
And then the only other thing that I wrote down for scares, although there are some pretty horrific moments throughout the film, but the only other thing that pinged me to write down for scares was when, again, we are going to be so off. The one thing that makes me nervous about doing this whole series about speaking in tongues is how we're going to butcher these names. But like when the police officer Jong-gu, when he goes and sees what his daughter has done at the end, when he sees, I mean, it's devastating, but
that little actor is great. She's awesome.
Oh man!
I mean, that final scene of her eating is terrifying.
Oh my gosh! I read that for the exorcism scene and her contortions and everything, that she actually spent a little bit of time studying dance so that she knew how to position her body so that she could be in control, wouldn't hurt herself. But yeah, she's outstanding. She's wonderful in the film, and yeah, it's devastating.
I do think this. I'd have this as a scare, but the discovery of the death shrine at the fisherman's house, coupled with the dog attack, is pretty intense. But
gosh,
and maybe what was at least on one go round comprehending his personal confusion is kind of a kudos to the film, where they put it all right in front of you, like
they do, yeah.
And I don't mean in a like, okay, take the movie Hereditary. It's only in the end, when there's a death cult, that you can start to see the hints of it. Like, this isn't really a case of the hints. It's like, this stranger dude is wandering the woods in a diaper, eating things and people, and has a death shrine in his house. Like,
sure, right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But you as a viewer, you're like, no way. This is a 2.5 hour movie. That can't be right. That ain't right.
That ain't right. That can't be right.
It's a whole new meaning.
Yeah, it's and I think that, like, I applaud the film's willingness to be so boldly, like, its ending is just so hard hitting in all of its implications. And I have a couple of other things that I want to read from two more quotes specifically that I want to read from the director from that playlist interview, but it really is. It is a film that it's remarkable how devastating it leaves you, and yet, as we've said multiple times already, leaves you wanting to immediately at least revisit some of what you've seen, if not all of what you've seen, to even just sort of wrap your head around it, even to just sort of understand exactly what it is that you've witnessed and what it all meant. So, did you have any more scares on your list?
I mean, there's stuff on it. I'm kind of curious just to get to some thematic stuff. I will say one of the final moments of the shaman's, what I call nosebleed barf explosion in the road is like, that's awful. That's so terrible. That's awful.
Well, and God, I mean, it can't go unsaid. I don't know why I didn't write this down. The film ends partially with a confrontation between a priest character who was introduced earlier in the film and this Japanese stranger in a cave, when the stranger is revealed to be demonic, if not the devil himself. That is a terrifying sequence.
That's so...
Oh, my...
That was amazing.
It's stunning. Absolutely stunning.
Because again, like, even up until then, you'll remember this, you've seen it twice, but when that actor emits that sinister laugh the frame before.
My gosh.
But even then, I'm like, I don't know.
You're like, there's something going on.
I'm not convinced.
Well,
yeah.
When he laughs, and then right after that, because what makes him laugh is the priest says, "Show me your true form, and I'll leave. I'll leave you alone."
Right.
And then when he laughs, on one hand, you're like, okay, all right, that laugh's a little sinister. I don't like this. This is a little uncomfortable. And then he follows the laugh.
Not the response I was expecting.
This is a little weird. Anybody else see this? And so, but then after he laughs, he says, "You think I'll let you leave?" I'm like, oh, and that's where, I don't know if you had this experience, but like, if you're really on the wavelength of this movie, I had an autonomic response to that. Like, my blood pressure dropped because I was like, oh my God, like, what am I witnessing? What am I seeing? Like, because up until that time, he's been very much like this sort of victim. He's been vulnerable. We've seen him appear frightened, appear emotional, appear all this thing. So when that pivots, and then he starts that sinister laugh, and then he begins to, in that editing sequence that you're visualizing while everything is falling apart with our main character as well, and he's quoting the words of Jesus, You know, like and you see stigmata appear on his hands and everything. I mean, it's dark, heavy stuff. And he's basically transforming into the devil, and he says, "It is I myself." Like, oh my gosh, it's haunting.
But the brilliance of that moment, just from a filmcraft standpoint, is there's the laugh scene where Esam challenges him to reveal his true form. It cuts back to what becomes the final engagement between Jung-gu and the woman in white. And then when it cuts back to the cavern, it's that close-up of a camera in these long-nailed, hairy-fingered hands that you realize, oh my God. Here we are.
Oh.
Like all the willful cloudiness Nathan applied to the character's identity and intention is suddenly abruptly, just forcefully eradicated.
Oh.
Like, okay, so what you're saying is he's the bad guy.
In no uncertain terms.
Right.
Gosh.
But I'm so kind of compelled by, because again, I rewatched that final. Did you catch? Maybe I'm overreading.
Okay.
But so Esam challenges the stranger, reveal your true form. There's what is literally this parallel action, and this is what's a really, really impressive filmcraft happening. Is Jung-gu is encountering the woman in white. The shaman calls him. This is intercut with calls him on the phone, so he's present physically with her.
Yeah.
The shaman from earlier calls him on the phone, who is compelling him, don't believe anything she says.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, as we've descended into the heart of darkness with Esam, and who we come to find is this devil person, creature thing, entity, their motivations and sort of identity is being starting to be revealed. There's this it's just an amazing swirl that's happening there that culminates. So right before we cut to Esam and the devil photographer.
Sure, right.
Once that final reveal happens, the woman in white, Jung-gu turns away from her. And then remember, the shot is he turns slowly back towards where she was, looking down, and she's holding his hand.
Yes.
This is what I'm saying. I may be overthinking this. In this thread of reveal your true form, is it just me, or is she pale and ashen? And remember in the background, he sees this pool of blood. Am I making this up?
No, you're not making it up. Mm-mm. No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like it just registered for me, like, is this her true form too? Like in this note of the trueness of these two characters' identities and thus
Sort
their
of
relationship
emerging.
to each other.
Yeah.
Like she is, because right before that, especially if you know her intentions are good, she's trying to be clear and forward and forthright, and he's shrouded with doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when she finally takes his hand, makes this physical contact, again, I may be overreading what I saw in terms of the lighting in the scene, but she looks ashen, she looks pale, as in, if you go do this is a death.
This is death. I don't think you're overreaching, because his visage, it couldn't be the lighting, because his visage is specifically not
the same.
Yes, he is very still full color to his cheeks. He's in a heightened emotional state, so there's almost a redness there. So yeah, comparatively speaking.
How did you interpret the blood pool?
Well, see, here's where I start to lose a little bit of traction on what specific things mean specific things. There is tons of religious symbology in the film that I know is deliberate, but I would not even be able to begin to understand what it means. Like, she's throwing stones at him that's the first time we see her, and that has been called out as a direct allusion to let him without sin cast the first stone. And then there are 7 deaths in the films. There are 12 possessions in the film. So there's all these, there's different things that I know mean something. So I
don't mean this to be a stupid question, but did you intuit those things, or you read in sort of researching the
in
stuff?
sort of researching it, come across it. No, so there's a few things that I would have intuited. Most of this I began to glean from just other analyses of the film and from other interviews and stuff like that. But as in terms of the blood pool, once you visualize that she is at least an angelic figure, if not directly a Christ figure, then the spilling of blood for a sense of atonement takes on a direct connotation, where it's like, okay, well then that's part of what we're dealing with here, sort of the emptying of herself in an effort to ensnare the evil and free and deliver them from how it has ensnared them. And I do feel like that's kind of a crucial element to what the director is after. Can I read you a couple of quotes from him? So this is again comes from this playlist interview, which is relatively brief, and everybody should check it out. The interviewer asks him, and I'm not going to read everything that he says, but the interviewer asks him about the origins of the film, and he talks about, I'm going to contextualize and paraphrase a paragraph. He talks about how he had experienced the death of several close acquaintances, and this is now where I get into a quote. He said, "The questions raised during those days coincided with the things I've always been wondering while making my previous films. The question was, why did they have to be victims of all people? I already had the answers for the how. What I wanted to find out was the why. So I began to meet and talk to the clergy of various religions, which was the starting point of this film." And so then there's a few other, I'm not going to summarize this entire interview because I just want people to seek it out and everything. But then he gets asked point blank about, some of the religious elements in the film. And they said, can you discuss what pulled you towards this? Are you a religious person yourself? And this is his quote. He says, and I'm reading this from the playlist interview. He says, "I chose religion because I believed that no areas of study or school of philosophy could answer the question I mentioned earlier." He says, "I'm a Christian, and if I didn't believe in the God from the Bible to begin with, I would have told this story in an entirely different way. Perhaps I could have answered the question with scientific reasoning." He says, "I'm not a very devout practitioner like the rest of my family, participating in missionary works and such, but I sometimes find myself agreeing to the concepts and comments that deny the existence of God. So when making important decisions, I seek counseling from Buddhist monks at temples in the mountains and pray there as well." So it all gets into how religion can kind of, again, he's interested in the why and not so much just the how. The how can be pretty explicit, but why is this happening? And so when you understand that intention, and then you encounter that scene with the woman in white, and that's what our main character can't get around. My timing and my why, and why is all of this happening? There's a moment earlier, and I should have written it down, but there's a moment earlier where they're talking about, I think it's the shaman, actually, where he says he's a fisherman. He's just fishing. Like, he's just seeing what he can get.
Yeah.
And I love that visual, and that is the first visual we have of the stranger on the beach or on the shore. But I love that idea of, like, you don't have a vendetta against the fish. You're just casting the bait out to see what you hook. But once a fish, in the fisherman analogy, once a fish has taken the bait, well, then you reel them in. Well, then you hook them and you reel them in. So it's not as if there's anything, and this is profound to me, thinking about these notions of, we want to see some profound meaning behind tragedy. And we want to see something, rich and important behind, these are the things that cause this tragedy, this devastation, everything. When I think some of the philosophy behind the film, or some of the exploration behind the film, is simply, well, no, sometimes it's just you nibbled on the line and you got hooked in to this thing that was bigger and beyond. Again, believing in malevolent forces and in the benevolent ones that are seeking to set you free from those things. But it is, in the fishing analogy, it is very difficult to get unhooked from a hook by yourself. You need some measure of intervention to unhook you from the hook. And so those thoughts are really powerful to me when I think about them in the context of this. I think the film's very interested in where do, like, the kind of blurred lines between what looks trustworthy and what looks innocent and what truly is and isn't, what looks benevolent and what doesn't. One of the things that I don't want to get too heady, but we've been talking a while, and I want to kind of steer toward home, and even if we don't land, part of the source behind doing this series is this notion of the ways in which we can navigate the world around us, and there's all kinds of conversation about otherness and the need for diversity in the body, diversity of experience, all these kind of things, ways in which we can treat the other as deficient or lesser than us. And I feel like one of the things this film seems to be very interested in is there's a line very early in the film where it's a comical line, where the grandmother says after the police officer says somebody's been killed, and she says, "Whatever kills people?" Like, like it's just an observation, but she's like, "Whatever kills people?"
Yeah.
And I feel like there is this through line through the film of like why does this happen? Like, what's up with this? Why does this happen? And what is devastating about the film is the ways in which the police officer tries to maintain control and tries to maintain security. He has decisively determined this is the threat. And what's really chilling about it is, as we've explored elsewhere on this podcast, he's correct, but does not realize the ramifications of what he's trying to do. In the same way that, like we talked about with 10 Cloverfield Lane way back in the day, like, he's right about the problem, but totally incorrect, and is making things worse for himself in the ways he's choosing to address the problem. And I feel so compelled by this notion of getting back to some old conversations about, you may be correct in identifying like the problem at hand, or in identifying, what the source of the wailing is, but that doesn't mean you're automatically going to know how to deal with it. And that doesn't mean you're going to automatically be correct in your solution to the problem. And I'm just very compelled by the final lines of the film where he's whispering, heartbreakingly so, "You remember Daddy is a policeman. I'll take care of everything." This man's belief in his fundamental ability to control the situation is most of his own undoing. And that's heartbreaking and very sobering to ponder in larger contexts. I have more thoughts, but I've been talking a while. Yep.
Well, it's funny because I feel like I'm also, not only am I trying to absorb and sort of marinate in your thematic ideas and the ones, and marry them somehow to what I'm sort of thinking about those on that track, but I'm also comprehending the narrative as well.
Yeah.
In new ways. In other words, it makes more sense to me now, because I got confused. I was like, okay, so Hoojin in the hospital is clean. She's she's released, but then she's not. And so it does, if you contextualize the narrative correctly, which in other words, if you understand it like I'm continuing to grow into, but all of the calamity, including Hoojin's initial onset of problem, is just the fishing. It's just the blind catching of, whatever, however you want to describe that. Like there's no specificity intended.
Right.
It just is. The death hex, presumably, or the intervention of the white woman specifically, does liberate Hoojin. But, correct me if I'm wrong, sequentially, the dad, after the death hex, is when they go out to his house that results in him flipping him off the bridge, thus making himself a marked intended.
This is what I wanted you to get your thought out, but here's the gut punch of the film. That moment you keep referencing where she's released, no, my friend, that is when she is ensnared. All that was prior to that, and this is the confusion that Jongyu has. I feel bad that I'm butchering his name again, but that's the confusion our police officer has, is he's pressing the woman in white. He says, she was sick before. She was sick before that. And he's confused by that. But in her conversation to him, and in what when you think about the fact that the shaman says at that moment the rat has fallen into the trap, that relief is because they've got her now. In the same way that it's like, well, now I'm just captive to this thing. Like, there's no more struggle anymore. You're just captive. You're caught at that moment. So what looks like relief to them is the moment when the woman in white has contextualized your daughter's possessed. Like, there's a spirit in her. And that's what she said. It's that moment. And that's the thing. It's complex. I'm not pretending it's simple. But in that same way, we talk about sometimes in Christianese terms about how when you're doing the devil's work, he leaves you alone. Where sometimes if you're on this sort of destructive path, he doesn't have to make you feel terribly oppressed or set against, because whatever, you're not fighting him anymore. Again, this is very Christianese language, but in that same way, she's ensnared at that point, because that's when, in the shaman's words, the rat has fallen into the trap. So that's when the hooks are really in this family. That's when, without the intervention by the woman in white, which we know ultimately fails, without that intervention, they are going to die. It's what she warned him about in the house when she first saw him. But this is the moment where, prior to that, there is influence and oppression and an attempt to get into her. Recontextualize the shaman death hex. He stops it. The dad stops it. So she's obviously going through some stuff, and she's being oppressed, and she's being sort of like manipulated, and she's going through some things she doesn't understand and everything. But that death hex was intended to ensnare her permanently. The shaman even sort of hedged his bets, because he said, like, don't do anything or else it'll backfire. This is a tricky thing.
Sure.
So he was already setting the stage that things were going to go wrong. So, but then the man stops it, and when the police officer stops it, he essentially does not allow them to complete this thing, and it is not until he continues to take matters into his own hands that he finally sort of stumbles into their trap. It's trippy. It's really trippy, but it's a lot.
Well, let me ask you, because, and maybe this is the final leg of our journey here, or the start of it at least. Like, what to you? I mean, I think it's a great film, and this question is in no means setting that quality aside. But I am curious, as you envisioned Speaking in Tongues, like, what prompted this to be your initial go?
So, there's a final quote from this playlist interview. So the interviewer asks him, he said, and then I'll answer your question more directly from my thoughts. The interviewer asked him, he says, this interview is mainly going to be read by American readers, some of whom may not be familiar with your work. Is there any kind of message you'd like to give them as a way to prepare for the unique ride they're going to get in the Wailing? And this is what the director said. I have no idea what kind of person you are to watch my film. Nevertheless, I tried to make a film for you. Whatever ideas come to you while you watch the film, they're yours. I want this film to be your own. On the other hand, there is one thing I wish everyone who watches this film to feel, regardless of who they are. A condolence for those who disappeared after having fallen as victims of the world, and for those who are left behind. I sincerely wish this film gives you some time for those condolences. So it is something, again, we're talking about the fisherman idea, the hook of things. We think about what's happening in nations all over the world. We hear about atrocities that are taking place, conflicts that are really coming down from people in power, and the heartbreaking element of it. You think about not that long ago from like the Syrian refugees, and there were some of those heartbreaking images of people who tried to make it here and died in doing so. And when I think about, I mean, the film's called The Wailing, and the cry, if you will. And I think that that's something that there is a time for mourning that I think this film can prompt some reflection on in the ways in which I do love. I say love somewhat trepidatiously, but I do love that it has a devastating ending, because I feel like if everything was just sort of neat and tidy, the film would lose 80% of its power. Because I feel like with it having this devastating ending, you do leave with a feeling of like, oh my God, these poor people are just caught. They just caught in a situation that was beyond them, that they didn't understand, that they didn't have the discernment and the understanding to even navigate who was on their side and who wasn't, and to understand when to act and when to wait. And they didn't understand when to move and when to stay, and they didn't understand when to speak and when to be silent. They didn't understand any of that. The priest comes down into the cave to confront this thing. He has no context or understanding for what he's just stepped into. And then by confronting this thing, it is ultimately lost to it, we would imagine. We don't know what ultimately happens to him, but I think it is a pretty safe bet. He's a goner. So, it's those kinds of things that make us pause for a minute, I think. And in all of these conversations, we were talking about specifically like things at the border, but I think in broader contexts of when we look at the atrocities that are happening in the world around us and in our nation and in other nations beyond our front door and beyond our back porch, when we think about all of these different things, it can be really easy to assign, as the characters in this film do, weight behind, you're the good guy, you're the bad guy, this is what we need to do to solve the problem. And part of why I thought this film would be a compelling way to open this conversation is ultimately we should pay some respect to the fact that some things are simply beyond us, and there are victims to the world, as the director had put it, that deserve our condolences, our thoughts, our moment of silence, our seeking to understand something that is beyond our personal experience, and we too rarely seize the opportunity to take those meditations, and we too rarely seize the opportunity to have those condolences. And so that's the kind of conversation I wanted to have. I know we're a bit running aground of time, but
no, I mean, whatever. It's our show. It's my sleep, but it's our show. I know you're not saying this, but there is a way that at least the final few sentences felt there's wailing on behalf of those lost to the world.
Right.
And then there's resignation to the fact that there will be those lost to the world.
Yeah.
And I know you're not saying B.
No.
But I think that's what it's kind of...
But I think...
Because it's interesting. What?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, I think grieving what has been lost is, in some measure at least, appropriate to some of the tragedies that we've experienced. And I don't think...
Yes.
You and I are very passionate about our belief in the ultimate reconciliatory power of God, specifically of the Christ, but I do think it is appropriate to weep. I do think it is appropriate to grieve those, as the director had put it, lost as victims to the world. Like this, they didn't ask for this, didn't deserve this.
Right.
They didn't get thrust in.
Right.
They got thrust into a situation that was beyond them, and so many people trying to assign. Well, I blame this. I blame that. I blame this. And in reality, our measures and efforts of control and our measures and efforts to try to manipulate the situation, in many ways, only deepen the hook's hold on us, and that is part of the myriad of things that I come away thinking about and meditating on in this film. The grieving of the woman in white when he leaves her, and the allusion, of course, to the rooster crowing 3 times, like the notion that when the rooster crows 3 times, it's done. It's over. It's happened. There's no not happening it again. And that will either be, from that moment on, will either be a path into further devastation or will be a path into hope out of it, depending on the choices you make in it. And the complexity of knowing, again, who is and is not on your side, and recognizing the complications there is something that I find very powerful and provocative, and mourning for the people who made a wrong decision. I shouldn't say wrong decision, but just chose something that ultimately did not go very well for them.
Well, and It's interesting because my initial takeaway before hearing all of that, which is valuable and enriching and is a very specific lens upon this particular film, my kind of half-formed takeaway and kind of what because I really did watch the movie like thinking like, okay, Reed wanted this one to be first, so let me figure out if I can
what's going on,
figure this out. And I think a takeaway for me was the terror inherent in that final scene when Jong-gu is just torn asunder, like rhetorically, between the shaman on the phone, the woman in white, and while technically the stranger isn't speaking to him, all those characters' voices are in concert to us, the viewer.
Yeah, right.
And sort of what I was wrestling through in that moment, and this is why I rewatched that scene, is the way, this is going to seem like an odd sort of inclusion here, but I'm going to try to build it back up to where we're at. I think a great disservice has been done to us historically from ourselves, perhaps. I've come a long way from what I feel like, I'll phrase it this way, I've come a long way from what I feel like was an earlier model of personal faith that counted myself as low and little and not without value, but that the value I had was not inherent and given.
Yeah.
And so what I think can happen when you adopt a posture, it's sort of like Little Shop of Horrors conversation, little reference there. When you adopt a posture of not, because lowliness, meekness, on a certain context, these are appropriate things, but depraved, unworthy, not valuable in your voice are, I don't think, appropriate things. And so what can happen if you adopt a posture of, I'll use a specifically connotative religious phrase, total depravity, thus I have nothing to offer, thus I don't trust my own viewpoint and value, and thus my viewpoint and value is determined by external things. So what you end up with is Jong-gu at the end, utterly bewildered and utterly uncertain what path to choose, because he has these voices screaming at him. And so that initially was my takeaway. I was like, okay, we are in a society and a culture and a world right now that has directly conflicting notions pounding us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We're kind of stuck between, well, this is what this thing is saying, this is what this thing is saying. As a slight note to where I said, I started a minute ago saying I used to feel this way. I do feel much more strongly in the notion of trust of oneself. Understand the nuance with which I'm saying that. Like, trust of oneself, I think, is a actually pretty healthy way to operate. And it's interesting if you contextualize those final scenes. So, trust of oneself. Okay, what does that mean in Jong-gu's case? Most of the shaman, and Jong-gu doesn't have a ton of verbal back and forth with the stranger, so
right.
it's a little dismissed there. But what does the shaman continue to say? Don't trust her.
Yeah.
What does she say? I'm here to protect you. There's such a different flavor to that. And as we go through the world and are trying to recognize where the hooks are in people, and there are voices that are feeding directly into our pockets, into our brains, into our comings and goings that say, don't trust that. And then there's the voice that says, you are safe and you are protected. Do this thing to protect yourself, to protect others. I don't mean that in a self-preservation kind of selfish way. I mean that in a comfort like a mother hen kind of way.
Yeah.
And that to me is a powerful takeaway too, in how we engage and how we view others. Don't trust them. Don't trust that.
Right.
Anyway, I don't know. I don't have a hard button to put on that, but just kind of mingling some of those things together.
Well, and we should be, not only for the time's sake, but for the film's sake, we should be very prepared that there are no, as with many of these films we're covering, there are no easy answers to this one. Like this is a film about the ways in which evil and good can be wrought from simple decisions and from simple consequences of things that we do and don't have control over. I want to, as a probable final button, I want to just sort of pull on this thread for a second of when you said, the difference in the ways the two of them engaged the conversation. The shaman very desperately saying, don't listen to her, don't trust her, none of that. And then her, when he asked point blank, who are you? I'm someone trying to save your daughter. And there is, and she does compel him. Now, we could get into all the ups and downs. Christ used language very much saying, like, don't be like the Pharisees and everything. Like, when you start straining at those gnats, it's just not terribly fruitful. I think that the best through line we have for navigating some of these situations is in recognizing I need help. We need help. I feel like this is a climate right now where everybody has a ton of answers. You need to do what I'm telling you to do. You need to listen to what I'm saying. I understand. Nobody else gets it. Nobody else understands. Yep. Don't believe them. Don't believe that. And I think if we were to humble ourselves, it's an often used scripture, and I resist using it so much because of how often it is used, but the scriptures do say, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my...
I love it. That was like rapping Lackey. Yeah. Well, if they will humble themselves.
What? But
call out.
It says, if they'll humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then will I hear from heaven. We are living in a climate right now where everybody wants to say, listen to the answers I have because by God I have them. Instead of saying, we need help. We will only be able to do this together. And we need to begin listening to one another. And we need to begin walking hand in hand and learning when to wait and learning when to listen and learning when to be silent. And we need help. And for this, the film evokes in me a tremendous amount of the fish on the line cannot get free by itself. It can't. Yeah. And we need each other, and we need to humble ourselves in the midst of that, and recognizing, not championing and heralding the next person who will have the answer. And you can assign whatever political or religious sentiment you want to that statement. Stop chasing. I'll quote the late, great Rich Mullins here, like, educational systems are not going to do it. So stop trusting in educational systems. Religious systems are not going to do it. Stop trusting those. Political systems are not going to do it. Stop trusting those. If you want to see the difference, it comes when you are willing to lay down your life and surrender to something beyond yourself. And only then, only together, will we come to that place where maybe the wailing will stop. And maybe we will see an end to the tears. And so, I know it's a heavy film. I know. But a powerful one, and a powerful one to provoke thought and reflection in what's taking place in the world around us and how we navigate it. Speaking in tongues, Nathan Rouse.
There you go.
It is.
Part 1.
There it is.
This is gonna be a bumpy ride.
It's gonna be a bit of a bumpy ride. Yes.
We just lost a segment of listeners for like the next 3 months.
I believe so. But
they'll check in October.
That's okay. That's all right.
That's all right.
But very quickly, because I know we're over time, let's send this to the fog meter, our fear measurement, our God measurement. Nathan, what would you put this on the fear measurement on a scale of 1 to 10?
Scale of 1 to 10, I'm gonna go. I think I'm actually gonna do 6. I think I was initially gonna hedge a little bit, but that final reveal is pretty powerful.
Yes, absolutely. The final reveal, on top of some of the other horrific imagery and the devastation of the end, I landed an 8 on the fear measurement. Okay. Substance Man, pulling no punches, dude. It's a 10. This provokes so much in me. The God meter, I'm gonna give it a 10. I find it incredibly powerful. So 10 for me.
I am going to go 7.5, and that's simply because on a first viewing, it's hard to know
Sure.
even what you're watching.
Yeah. I understand that.
But yeah. So that means we give The Wailing, part 1 of this brand new wild series, Speaking in Tongues, an 8 out of 10 on the fog meter.
Oh,
so that's
my gosh.
That's pretty respectable score there.
Yeah, absolutely. So part 1 is in the books. We hope that you will join us for this bumpy but we feel very important conversational ride with us over the next few weeks. At the moment, we have not quite landed on what the next installment will be, but stay tuned to social media, not only to find out what we're going to be covering next week, but where you can watch it. So be on the lookout.
Additionally, that said, you can watch episodes 3 and 4 of season 1 of Dark. You can do that.
Definitely do that. So check out episodes 3 and 4 of Netflix series Dark. We will inform you as quickly as we've decided what our next film in this series is going to be, and we will see you guys then. Nathan, thank you so much for
You're
this
welcome,
conversation
buddy.
and for this series idea, and just I'm very excited for what's going to be ahead of us.
Thank you, brother. See you next week, everybody.
Bye, guys. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. You can follow us on Twitter @TheFearOfGod. You can like and follow us on Facebook, or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. You can follow us on Instagram @FearOfGodPodcast, or go to morethanonelesson.com to leave a comment on this post or any of the other official episode posts. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. Our theme music was composed by Lee Wright and Reed Lackey, and our podcast art was crafted by Jacob Hunt of jacobhuntcomics.com. Merchandise for the show can now be found at tpublic.com. Just search for The Fear of God Podcast, all one word. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or a review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.